I woke up at 3 in the morning to discover my truck wouldn't start. And that's when I realized someone had stolen the block heater cord right out of the engine compartment during the night. Living in Fargo, North Dakota meant temperatures regularly dropped to 20 below zero in January. And without that block heater, my diesel truck was basically an expensive metal sculpture sitting in my driveway. What made this situation exponentially worse was that my truck wasn't just any vehicle. It was my emergency response vehicle for the volunteer fire department, clearly marked with reflective decals and emergency equipment mounted inside. My name is Nathan Quincy, and I'd lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision for 3 years. The place seemed perfect when I moved in after my divorce. Nice houses, decent neighbors, reasonable HOA fees. The homeowners association had always been manageable, sending out the occasional reminder about lawn care or holiday decoration guidelines. But 6 months ago, everything changed when Brenda Hutchinson got elected as the new HOA president. Brenda was the textbook definition of what people online called a Karen. Mid-40s, blonde highlights that looked like they cost more than my mortgage payment, and an expression that suggested she perpetually smelled something unpleasant. She drove a white Escalade with custom plates that read Hoquin, which I assumed meant HOA Queen. The woman had made it her personal mission to patrol the neighborhood looking for violations, armed with her phone camera and a thick binder containing every rule the HOA had established since the subdivision was built in 2008. I stood in my driveway that freezing morning, staring at the empty space where my block heater cord should have been. The cord itself was still plugged into the outlet on my garage wall, but someone had cut it, taking the entire heating element that wrapped around the engine block. This wasn't just theft. This was deliberate sabotage that cost me about $400 in parts, plus the labor to install a new one. My neighbor, Frank Morrison, came out to get his newspaper and noticed me examining the damage. "What happened?" he asked, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Someone stole my block heater, cut the whole thing right out of the engine." Frank's eyes widened. "Are you serious? Who would do that?" "I have a pretty good idea," I said, thinking about the violation notice I'd received just 2 days earlier. The notice had been taped to my front door, written in Brenda's distinctive handwriting. It complained that my truck was parked improperly in my driveway because it extended 6 inches past the edge of my garage door when viewed from the street. According to her interpretation of the HOA rules, no vehicle could extend beyond the visual line of the garage opening. It was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever read. Half the houses in the neighborhood had trucks or SUVs that stuck out further than mine. I'd ignored the notice, which probably made Brenda furious. She expected immediate compliance with her demands, no matter how absurd. "You think Brenda did this?" Frank lowered his voice, even though we were the only people outside. "I'm not accusing anyone yet, but I'm going to find out." I called the police non-emergency line and filed a report. Officer Martinez arrived 40 minutes later, took photos of the cut cord and the empty engine compartment, and wrote everything down in his notepad. "This is pretty weird," he said. "Most theft around here is opportunity stuff. Unlocked cars, packages from porches. This is targeted and took some effort. They need to know what they were looking for and have the tools to remove it. It's also a serious problem because this is my emergency response vehicle," I explained, pointing to the volunteer fire department decals. "I need to be able to respond to calls at any time. Someone disabling this vehicle could literally cost lives." Officer Martinez's expression changed. "You're with the VFD. 5 years now." I live closest to the station, so I'm usually first on scene for medical calls in this area." He started writing more notes. "That changes things. Disabling an emergency vehicle is a much more serious offense than simple theft. Do you have any enemies? Anyone who might want to prevent you from responding to calls?" "Not enemies exactly. But I've got an HOA president who's been harassing me about where I park this truck." Brenda Hutchinson. Officer Martinez didn't even try to hide his reaction. "We've dealt with her before. She called us 6 times last year about various violations in the neighborhood. None of them were actually police matters." He took down all the information about the HOA dispute and the violation notice. "I'll talk to her, but unless you have proof she did it, there's not much we can do right away. I'd suggest getting a security camera pointed at your driveway." After Officer Martinez left, I called my fire chief, Tom Brennan, to explain why I might not make the next call if it came in before I could get my truck fixed. "Are you kidding me?" Tom's voice rose with each word. "Someone deliberately disabled your response vehicle. That's what it looks like. Nathan, this is serious. We'll document this officially, and I'm going to make some calls. The city takes interference with emergency services very seriously, even volunteer services." I spent the rest of the morning calling around to find a mechanic who could install a new block heater quickly. The earliest appointment I could get was 3 days out. In the meantime, I'd have to park the truck in a heated garage across town at the fire station, which defeated the entire purpose of having rapid response capability from my home. Around noon, I decided to go directly to Brenda. Maybe there was some explanation. Maybe she'd seen something. Or maybe I'd be able to tell from her reaction whether she was involved. Brenda lived in the largest house in the subdivision, a 2-story colonial with columns framing the entrance and a 3-car garage. Her lawn looked like it belonged on a golf course, even in winter. Every shrub was perfectly trimmed, every edge perfectly defined. A wooden sign near the mailbox declared, "Hutchinson Home ESD, 2015" in fancy script. I rang the doorbell and waited. Through the frosted glass, I saw movement. Then the door opened. Brenda stood there in yoga pants and a designer sweater, holding a glass of white wine despite it being barely past noon. "Nathan," she said, managing to make my name sound like an accusation. "I assume you're here about the violation notice. Actually, I'm here because someone stole the block heater out of my truck last night." Her face remained perfectly neutral, too neutral. "I'm sorry to hear that. Have you called the police?" "I have. They took a report." Officer Martinez said he'd be following up with some interviews in the neighborhood. Just the slightest flicker crossed her face. "I'm sure he will, though I don't know what I could tell him. I was home all evening and didn't see anything suspicious." "The thing is, Brenda, that truck is my emergency response vehicle. Disabling it isn't just theft. It's interfering with emergency services. The police and fire department are taking it very seriously." "I wouldn't know anything about that," she said, her tone clipped. "But while you're here, I expect you to address that parking violation. The rules don't clearly state anything about 6 inches past a garage door. You're making up interpretations to harass people." Her expression hardened. "I am enforcing the covenants that every homeowner agreed to when they purchased property in this subdivision. If you don't like the rules, you're welcome to move somewhere else. Or maybe you could focus on actual problems instead of inventing ones. Your vehicle is an eyesore, Nathan. It doesn't belong in a nice neighborhood like this. Perhaps this is a sign that you should reconsider your living arrangements." The way she said it, the specific phrasing, sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. She'd essentially admitted that she thought my truck didn't belong here, right after it had been sabotaged. Are you saying you're glad my truck was vandalized? I didn't say that at all. I simply said that perhaps you should reconsider keeping such a vehicle in a residential area. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a conference call with the HOA board. She closed the door before I could respond. I stood on her perfect porch for a moment, processing the conversation. Every instinct told me she was involved, but I had no proof. I needed that security camera, and I needed it today. I drove to the hardware store and bought 2 high-definition cameras with night vision and motion detection. I spent the afternoon installing them, positioning one to cover my driveway and truck, the other to cover the front of my house. Both cameras uploaded footage to cloud storage, so even if someone damaged them, I'd have the evidence saved. That night, I parked my truck back in the driveway after running a heavy-duty extension cord from my neighbor Frank's garage. He'd offered when he heard what happened, and his garage shared a property line with mine, making it feasible. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it would keep the engine warm enough to start. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the cameras at 6:30. I pulled up the feed and watched as Brenda's white Escalade crept past my house, slowing down as it passed my driveway. She was clearly inspecting my truck and the extension cord setup. The camera captured her face perfectly through the windshield, her expression a mix of anger and calculation. 20 minutes later, another violation notice appeared taped to my door. This one complained about the extension cord being an unsightly and unsafe modification to the property exterior, and demanded its immediate removal. She'd also added a threat of daily fines starting at $50 if I didn't comply within 48 hours. I took photos of the notice and called Officer Martinez. "She just doesn't stop, does she?" he said after I explained the situation. "Look, I talked to her yesterday about the theft. She denied any involvement and got pretty hostile about being questioned. But I can't arrest someone for being unpleasant. What if I told you I have video of her casing my property this morning, followed immediately by another harassment notice?" That's interesting, but still not proof of the theft. However, it does establish a pattern of harassment. Have you talked to a lawyer? I hadn't considered that angle. You think I need one? I think you're in a dispute with someone who has authority in your HOA and is using that authority to make your life difficult. A lawyer could advise you on your rights and maybe send a cease and desist letter. After hanging up with Officer Martinez, I started researching attorneys who handled HOA disputes. I found one named Sarah Chen who had excellent reviews and specialized in homeowner rights. I called her office and explained my situation to her paralegal, who scheduled a consultation for the following day. That afternoon, I had a shift at the fire station. Working as a volunteer firefighter meant I had a regular day job too. I was a civil engineer for the city's public works department, which gave me flexible hours and understanding supervisors who supported my volunteer work. But this situation with Brenda was eating into my time and mental energy. At the station, I filled in Tom and the other firefighters about what was happening. "This is crazy," said Jake Reynolds, one of the younger guys on the crew. "She's actively trying to prevent you from responding to emergencies. It seems that way." Tom rubbed his jaw, thinking, "You know what? I'm going to reach out to the city attorney's office. The city has an interest in making sure our volunteer responders can do their jobs. If this woman is interfering with that, there might be legal grounds for the city to get involved. I don't want to make a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be. Nathan, she stole parts off an emergency vehicle. That's already a big deal. What if we'd gotten a call that night and someone died because you couldn't respond? She needs to understand the consequences of her actions." The next day, I met with Sarah Chen in her office in downtown Fargo. She was a sharp woman in her 30s who listened carefully as I laid out everything that had happened, showing her the violation notices, the photos of my damaged truck, the police report, and the video footage of Brenda surveilling my property. "This is pretty egregious," Sarah said, reviewing the documents spread across her conference table. "HOA presidents have authority to enforce covenants, but they don't have unlimited power. What she's doing crosses several lines. What are my options?" "Well, first, these violation notices she's sending are questionable. The covenant language about parking doesn't support her interpretation. I'd need to review your HOA's complete governing documents, but based on what you've shown me, she's overstepping. Second, the pattern of harassment is clear. Third, and most importantly, if she's the one who vandalized your truck, she's committed a crime that goes beyond a simple HOA dispute. The police can't prove she did it. Not yet, but your cameras are now in place. If she tries anything else, you'll have evidence. In the meantime, I can send her a letter on your behalf, making it clear that her actions constitute harassment and that you'll pursue legal remedies if she continues." "How much will that cost?" The letter. $500. "If this escalates to actual litigation, we're looking at significantly more, potentially thousands. But sometimes a letter from an attorney is enough to make people back down, especially when they realize their behavior is legally indefensible." I authorized her to send the letter. It felt good to have someone on my side who knew the law and wouldn't be intimidated by Brenda's bullying. Over the next few days, things were quiet. Too quiet. I got my truck into the mechanic and had a new block heater installed. The bill came to $480, exactly as I'd estimated. I kept the receipt for insurance purposes, and in case I decided to sue Brenda for damages. Sarah's letter was delivered to Brenda via certified mail on a Thursday. According to the tracking information, she signed for it Friday morning. Friday evening, I got a call from Frank. "Nathan, you need to see this." "See what?" "Just come outside." I walked out my front door to find Frank standing in his driveway, pointing down the street. A large banner had been hung across the entrance to the subdivision, the kind usually reserved for announcing community garage sales or holiday parties. But this banner had a different message. "Meadowbrook Estates residents, parking violations will not be tolerated. Please respect our community standards." "That went up about an hour ago," Frank said, "and every house in the neighborhood got this." He handed me a flyer, professionally printed on HOA letterhead. It outlined enhanced parking enforcement and specifically mentioned that commercial vehicles, oversized vehicles, and emergency vehicles not actively in use needed to be parked in garages or off-street locations that were not visible from public roads. "She's escalating," I said, reading through the flyer. "She's targeting you specifically. Everyone knows it. I've gotten 3 calls from neighbors asking what they should do. Nobody wants to get on Brenda's bad side, but they also think this is ridiculous." "What do you mean, what they should do?" "There's going to be an emergency HOA meeting Monday night. Brenda called it to vote on these new parking restrictions. If they pass, you'll be in violation of actual HOA rules, not just her made-up interpretations." This was worse than I thought. If Brenda could get the HOA board to rubber stamp her vendetta against me, I'd have much fewer legal options. I called Sarah Chen first thing Monday morning. "She's trying to change the rules to make your situation explicitly prohibited," Sarah said after I explained about the meeting. "You have the right to attend that meeting and speak. HOA meetings are supposed to follow specific procedures, including giving homeowners adequate notice and opportunity to comment on proposed rule changes. The meeting is tonight. The flyer was delivered Friday. That's probably not adequate notice for a rule change of this magnitude. I'll draft a letter objecting to the procedural issues and email it to you. You can read it into the record at the meeting. Also, I'd strongly suggest you attend and bring any neighbors who support you. I spent the rest of Monday making calls. Frank agreed to come. So did Tom from the fire department, though he wasn't a resident and would only be there as a representative of the VFD. I called a few other neighbors I was friendly with. Most were sympathetic but didn't want to get involved. Two others, Bill Patterson and Jennifer Walsh, said they'd attend and speak up if needed. The meeting was held at the clubhouse in the center of the subdivision. When I arrived at 7 that evening, the parking lot was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Apparently, a lot of residents were interested in this issue, either supporting Brenda's crackdown or opposing it. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a table where Brenda sat with 4 other board members. I recognized 2 of them. Margaret Simpson, an elderly woman who'd lived in the neighborhood since it was built, and Todd Brennan, a middle-aged accountant who seemed to agree with whatever Brenda said. The other 2 board members were people I'd seen around but never really met. Brenda called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. She looked directly at me as she began speaking. "Thank you all for coming tonight. We've called this emergency meeting to address a growing problem in our community. Parking violations have become increasingly common, and several residents have complained about the appearance of commercial and emergency vehicles being stored in residential driveways. Several residents," Jennifer Walsh spoke up from the audience. "I haven't heard anyone complain except you, Brenda." Brenda's face tightened. "The complaints have been submitted to the board confidentially. We have a responsibility to address them." "I'd like to know who complained," Bill Patterson added. "Because I think you're making this up to target Nathan." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Brenda banged her gavel. "This meeting will be conducted with proper decorum. We have a proposed amendment to our parking restrictions on the agenda. I'll now read the amendment." She proceeded to read a long, jargon-filled modification that basically prohibited any vehicle with commercial or emergency markings from being parked overnight in a visible location. It also banned extension cords running across property lines and prohibited the use of block heaters unless the vehicle was parked inside a closed garage. When she finished, she said, "The board will now vote on this amendment." "Wait," I stood up. "Don't residents get to comment before the board votes?" Brenda sighed dramatically. "Fine. You have 3 minutes. First, I have a letter from my attorney regarding the procedural issues with this meeting." I read Sarah's letter, which pointed out that HOA bylaws required 10 days' notice for any rule changes, that proposed amendments had to be provided in writing to all homeowners at least a week before the vote, and that the board couldn't vote on new restrictions without following proper procedures. By the time I finished reading, Margaret Simpson was frowning at Brenda. "Is this correct?" Margaret asked. "We're supposed to give 10 days' notice." "This is an emergency situation," Brenda said. "What emergency?" Tom Brennan spoke from the back. "I'm the fire chief for the volunteer department. The only emergency I'm aware of is someone vandalizing one of my firefighter's vehicles and trying to prevent him from serving this community." That got everyone's attention. Tom stood and walked to the front. "Nathan Quincy has been a volunteer firefighter for 5 years. He's responded to over 200 calls, including medical emergencies, vehicle accidents, and structure fires. Several of those calls were in this very subdivision. His response time is critical because he lives here. The vehicle you're trying to ban has saved lives. I find it deeply concerning that your HOA president would rather have pretty streets than rapid emergency response." People started talking all at once. Brenda banged her gavel repeatedly. The firefighting service is appreciated, but it doesn't give anyone the right to violate community standards. What violation? Frank stood up. His truck is parked in his own driveway. Half the people in this room have vehicles that stick out just as far. You're inventing rules to harass him. I am enforcing existing covenants. No, you're not, Jennifer said. I've lived here for 8 years. Nobody enforced these kinds of petty rules until you became president. You've turned this HOA into your personal fiefdom. More voices joined in, most of them supporting my side. The meeting was devolving into chaos. Brenda looked furious, her face flushed red. Everyone needs to leave, she announced. This meeting is over. You can't just end the meeting, Margaret Simpson said. We need to vote on whether to proceed with this amendment. Fine. Brenda glared at her fellow board member. All in favor of the parking amendment, Brenda and Todd raised their hands. The other 3 board members didn't. The amendment fails, Margaret said with satisfaction. And I move that we table any further discussion of parking restrictions until proper notice can be given and residents have time to review the actual covenant language. Second, said another board member. Brenda looked like she might explode. This is ridiculous. You're all enabling rule-breaking behavior. No, Margaret said firmly. We're following proper procedures, something you seem to have forgotten how to do. The meeting broke up with small groups of people clustering together, discussing what had just happened. Several neighbors came up to me to express support. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. That went better than expected, he said. Thanks for showing up. Your speech probably turned the tide. Just telling the truth, but watch your back. She's not going to let this go. Tom was right. Over the next week, Brenda ramped up her campaign against me. She started posting on the neighborhood Facebook page, making vague references to residents who think they are above the rules, and sharing photos of various vehicles she deemed to be in violation, including my truck. She never named me specifically, but everyone knew who she was talking about. The Facebook posts backfired on her. More and more residents started pushing back, pointing out that Brenda herself had multiple violations if you applied her standards consistently. Someone posted a photo of her trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. Another showed her lawn decorations extending onto the sidewalk. A third documented that her house number wasn't the regulation 4 inches tall as specified in the covenants. Brenda deleted all the posts and then deleted the entire Facebook group, claiming it had become toxic and unconstructive. But I was more concerned about what she might do offline. My security cameras were running 24 hours a day, and I checked the footage every morning. For a week, nothing unusual appeared. Then, on a Tuesday night around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I grabbed it and pulled up the live feed. A figure in dark clothing was standing next to my truck, doing something near the front wheel. I couldn't see clearly what they were doing, but it was obvious they didn't belong there. I jumped out of bed, pulled on pants and shoes, and rushed downstairs. By the time I got outside, the person was gone. But when I examined my truck, I found that someone had let the air out of all 4 tires. Not slashed them, just opened the valve stems and let the air out. It was another act of sabotage that would disable my vehicle without causing permanent damage that would be easy to prove. I went back inside and reviewed the camera footage on my computer. The figure had approached from the direction of Brenda's house, keeping their head down and face hidden. They wore a dark hoodie and gloves. After releasing the air from my tires, they'd walked back the same way they came. I followed the figure's path on the video timeline, switching between my cameras. At the edge of one camera's range, I caught a glimpse of the person pulling down their hood as they reached the sidewalk. The image was grainy due to the distance and darkness, but the streetlight caught enough detail to show blonde hair. I saved the footage and called Officer Martinez, even though it was the middle of the night. "This is escalating," he said after watching the video I'd emailed him. "That's clearly targeted harassment now. The problem is I still can't definitively identify who that is from the footage. It's Brenda. It has to be. I believe you, but has to be isn't enough for an arrest." The defense would argue the footage is too unclear, that it could be anyone with blonde hair. We need more. What do you suggest? Keep documenting everything. And I'm going to increase patrols in your neighborhood. If we catch her in the act, that's a different story. I spent the next hour re-inflating my tires with a portable compressor. By the time I finished, it was nearly 4 in the morning. I went back to bed but couldn't sleep. This situation had gone from annoying to genuinely disturbing. Brenda was escalating her attacks, becoming bolder and more frequent. The next day, I met with Sarah Chen again to discuss options. "We can pursue a restraining order based on the pattern of harassment," she said. The video evidence, combined with the previous incidents and the threatening nature of her actions, might be enough to convince a judge. What would a restraining order do? It would legally prohibit her from coming near you, your property, or your vehicle. If she violated it, she could be arrested immediately. It also creates a legal record of her behavior, which helps if we need to pursue further action later. Let's do it. Sarah prepared the paperwork, and we filed for a temporary restraining order that afternoon. The court scheduled a hearing for the following week, where both sides would present evidence, and the judge would decide whether to grant a permanent order. Brenda was served with the restraining order paperwork on Thursday. By Thursday evening, I received a certified letter from the HOA attorney, informing me that I was being fined $5,000 for ongoing covenant violations and legal harassment of the HOA president. I immediately forwarded the letter to Sarah. "This is retaliation," she said when she called me back, "and it's going to help our case. She's using her position as HOA president to punish you for exercising your legal rights. That's textbook abuse of authority." The hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. I took time off work and met Sarah at the courthouse in downtown Fargo. The building was an imposing structure of granite and glass, and the courtroom where our hearing was scheduled felt formal and intimidating. Brenda arrived with her own attorney, a stern-looking man in an expensive suit, who introduced himself as Richard Caldwell. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, Brenda wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, clearly trying to present herself as a reasonable, professional person rather than the aggressive harasser she'd proven herself to be. Judge Patricia Morrison entered, and we all stood. She was an older woman with gray hair and reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked over the paperwork in front of her before addressing the courtroom. "This is a hearing regarding a petition for a restraining order filed by Nathan Quincy against Brenda Hutchinson. Miss Chen, you may present your case." Sarah stood and laid out everything that had happened: the initial parking complaints, the theft of my block heater, the continued harassment via violation notices, the Facebook campaign, and the recent tire incident. She presented the police reports, the video footage, the threatening letters, and testimony from me about how these actions had affected my life and my ability to serve as a volunteer firefighter. I testified about finding my block heater stolen, about the meeting where Tom Brennan explained the importance of my rapid response capability, and about the fear I now felt in my own home, wondering when the next attack on my property would come. When Sarah finished, Richard Caldwell stood to present Brenda's defense. Your Honor, Miss Hutchinson is a dedicated HOA president trying to maintain community standards in the face of ongoing violations by Mr. Quincy. She has not engaged in harassment. She has simply been doing her job as elected by her fellow homeowners. The parking complaints are legitimate, based on the subdivision's covenants. The violations notices were appropriate enforcement actions. As for the alleged vandalism, there is no proof whatsoever that Miss Hutchinson was involved. What about the video footage of someone with blonde hair letting air out of Mr. Quincy's tires? Judge Morrison asked. The footage is inconclusive. You can't see the person's face clearly. It could be anyone. My client denies any involvement in that incident or the theft of the block heater. Judge Morrison turned to Brenda. Miss Hutchinson, do you deny letting air out of Mr. Quincy's tires on the night in question? Brenda stood. Absolutely, Your Honor. I was home in bed at that time. I would never do such a thing. I'm simply trying to maintain property values in our subdivision. And do you deny stealing or having any knowledge of the theft of his block heater? I deny it completely. I don't even know what a block heater is. That statement hung in the air. Sarah immediately pounced on it. Your Honor, if I may. Miss Hutchinson just claimed she doesn't know what a block heater is. Yet when Mr. Quincy confronted her the day after the theft, she showed no curiosity about what had been stolen or why it mattered. She immediately pivoted to discussing parking violations. For someone who claims not to know what a block heater is, she seemed remarkably uncurious about this unusual theft. Judge Morrison made a note. That's an interesting observation. Mr. Caldwell. My client simply wasn't interested in discussing matters unrelated to HOA business with Mr. Quincy. Except that interference with an emergency vehicle is serious business, Judge Morrison said, and I'm troubled by the pattern of behavior here. Miss Hutchinson, can you explain why you called an emergency HOA meeting with inadequate notice specifically to change parking rules that would affect Mr. Quincy? Brenda faltered. I was responding to resident complaints. Which residents? Can you provide names? The complaints were confidential. That's convenient, Judge Morrison said dryly. She looked at the documents in front of her for a long moment. Here's what I see. Mr. Quincy has presented a pattern of escalating harassment that began when he didn't immediately comply with a questionable violation notice. The incidents have included theft, vandalism, and abuse of HOA authority. While I cannot definitively prove that Miss Hutchinson personally committed the theft and vandalism based on the current evidence, the circumstantial evidence is quite strong. The timing, the targeting, and her behavior all support Mr. Quincy's claims. She looked directly at Brenda. Miss Hutchinson, I am granting a temporary restraining order. You are to stay at least 100 yards away from Mr. Quincy, his home, and his vehicle. You are prohibited from contacting him directly or through intermediaries. You may not issue any HOA violations specifically targeting him, though the HOA may continue to operate normally through other board members. This order will remain in effect for 6 months, at which point we can revisit if necessary. You understand? Brenda looked shocked. Your Honor, this will make it impossible for me to fulfill my duties as HOA president. Then perhaps you should consider whether you're fit for that position. Your behavior has crossed lines that should never be crossed. You've used your authority to wage a personal vendetta against a man who serves his community as a volunteer firefighter. That's not leadership. That's abuse of power. Richard Caldwell tried to interject, but Judge Morrison held up her hand. I'm not finished. Miss Hutchinson, I want you to understand something very clearly. If you violate this restraining order, if there are any further incidents involving Mr. Quincy's property, you will be arrested immediately. I don't care if the evidence is circumstantial. The pattern is clear enough that I will hold you responsible. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Brenda said quietly, her face pale. "Mr. Quincy, I suggest you maintain your security cameras and continue documenting everything. Miss Chen, please provide my office with all video footage and evidence collected so far. If there are further incidents, I want a complete record." "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah said. The hearing concluded and we left the courtroom. In the hallway, Sarah was pleased. "That went very well." Judge Morrison clearly saw through Brenda's act. "The restraining order gives you real protection now." "What about the $5,000 fine the HOA levied against me?" "We'll file a motion to invalidate it. Given the judge's ruling today, I think we have a strong case that the fine was retaliatory." "I'll also recommend that you attend the next HOA board meeting and call for a vote of no confidence in Brenda as president." Over the next few weeks, things were blissfully quiet. My security cameras showed no suspicious activity. I received no violation notices. The HOA attorney sent a letter withdrawing the fine, claiming it had been issued in error. Brenda's Escalade no longer made slow passes by my house. I learned from Frank that Brenda had become increasingly isolated in the neighborhood. The restraining order became common knowledge, and most residents had sided against her. Several board members had privately expressed to Frank that they regretted not standing up to Brenda sooner. The next regular HOA board meeting was scheduled for the first Tuesday of the month. I attended, along with Frank, Jennifer, Bill, and about 20 other residents. Brenda sat at the head table, her expression neutral but her body language tense. Margaret Simpson, as vice president, called the meeting to order. "Before we begin regular business, I believe some residents have concerns to raise." I stood. "I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Brenda Hutchinson as HOA president. Her actions over the past several months have damaged our community, abused her authority, and resulted in a legal restraining order. I don't believe she should continue to lead this association." Several residents applauded. Brenda's face flushed red, but she remained silent, probably on advice from her attorney. "I second the motion," Frank said. Margaret nodded. "We have a motion and a second. Discussion." Jennifer Walsh stood. "I've lived here for 8 years and never had problems with the HOA until Brenda took over. She's turned our neighborhood into a police state, inventing violations and targeting people she doesn't like. We need leadership that works with residents, not against them." Bill Patterson added, "I'm also concerned about the legal liability. If Brenda's actions have already resulted in one restraining order, what's to stop her from doing something that gets the HOA sued? We can't afford that kind of risk." Todd Brennan, one of the board members who'd supported Brenda, tried to defend her. "Brenda has worked hard to maintain our property values. Sometimes leadership means making unpopular decisions." "Leadership doesn't mean harassment," Margaret said sharply, "and it doesn't mean breaking the law. I've served on this board for 10 years and I've never seen behavior like what's happened recently. We need to do better." After 15 minutes of discussion, Margaret called for the vote. She handed out paper ballots to all homeowners present. The vote wasn't close. Out of 32 ballots cast, 28 voted for the motion of no confidence. Only 4 voted to keep Brenda as president. "The motion passes," Margaret announced. "Brenda Hutchinson is removed as HOA president, effective immediately. As vice president, I will assume the role of acting president until we can hold proper elections next month." Brenda stood abruptly, grabbed her bag, and walked out of the meeting without saying a word. I felt a mixture of relief and vindication. Maybe now things could return to normal. But 2 days later, Officer Martinez called me with concerning news. We got a break in your case. A couple neighborhoods over, someone's garage was broken into last night. They have security cameras and got a clear shot of the suspect. It's a woman with blonde hair driving a white Escalade. The cameras caught the license plate. Let me guess, Hoquin, that's the one. We're getting a warrant for her arrest. But here's the thing. When we ran her property records to confirm her address, we found something interesting. She has a storage unit at a facility on Main Avenue. We're getting a warrant for that too. Why? Because when we interviewed the guy whose garage got broken into, he reported several items stolen, including a brand new block heater still in the box. His truck is the same make and model as yours. We think Brenda might have a history of stealing auto parts, and she might be storing them somewhere. 2 days later, Officer Martinez called again. We executed the warrants. You're going to want to hear this. In Brenda's storage unit, we found your block heater. What? How do you know it's mine? Because it's got your VIN number engraved on it. When you had it installed originally, did the mechanic mark it? I thought back. Yes. The fire department requires all equipment to be marked for identification purposes. The mechanic engraved my truck's VIN on the heating element. Well, it's there in her storage unit, along with parts from about a dozen other vehicles. She's been stealing auto parts for at least a year, maybe longer. We found block heaters, catalytic converters, wheels, you name it. She's been selling them online. I was stunned. This wasn't just about harassing me. Oh, it was definitely about harassing you, but you stumbled onto something bigger. Brenda Hutchinson has been running a theft ring, targeting vehicles in HOA communities across Fargo. She'd use her position to scope out expensive vehicles, then steal parts during the night. The HOA president cover was perfect. Nobody questioned someone walking around the neighborhood at odd hours if they're supposedly checking for violations. That's insane. It gets better. Or worse, depending on your perspective. The reason she went after your block heater specifically was because it's an expensive, easy-to-remove part that's in high demand during winter. But she didn't realize that stealing from an emergency vehicle carries enhanced penalties. She's being charged with multiple counts of theft, trafficking in stolen property, and interference with emergency services. That last one is a felony. When will she be arrested? She already has been. We picked her up an hour ago. She's being processed now. I sat down, trying to process this information. All this time, I'd thought Brenda was just a petty tyrant on a power trip. But she'd been a criminal using her HOA position to facilitate her crimes. Over the following weeks, more details emerged. The police investigation revealed that Brenda had stolen over $30,000 worth of auto parts over 18 months. She'd been selling them through various online marketplaces, using fake accounts and meeting buyers in parking lots. The money had gone to support her lavish lifestyle and pay off credit card debt from her spending habits. The case against her was overwhelming. In addition to my testimony and video evidence, police had recovered text messages on her phone discussing various theft targets, including specific references to my truck. They'd found tools in her garage that matched marks on stolen vehicles. They'd traced sales of stolen parts back to her bank accounts. Her attorney, Richard Caldwell, negotiated a plea deal. Brenda pled guilty to felony theft, trafficking in stolen property, and interference with emergency services. In exchange for the plea, the prosecutor dropped several lesser charges. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years, along with restitution to all victims, and 5 years of probation after release. At the sentencing hearing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I stood before the court and explained how her actions had affected me. The fear I'd felt, the money I'd spent on repairs and legal fees, the impact on my ability to serve the community as a firefighter, and the violation of feeling unsafe in my own home. Brenda listened with her head down, showing no emotion. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood and gave a brief statement. I apologized to Mr. Quincy and the other victims. I made terrible choices, and I take full responsibility for my actions. It felt hollow and rehearsed, but I didn't care. Justice had been served. After the sentencing, Tom Brennan threw a barbecue at the fire station to celebrate the resolution of the case. Most of my neighbors from Meadowbrook Estates came, including Frank, Jennifer, and Bill. Margaret Simpson, now officially elected as the new HOA president, made a toast to Nathan for standing up to corruption and protecting our community, both as a firefighter and as a neighbor who refused to be bullied. Everyone raised their drinks. It felt good to be supported and vindicated after months of stress and harassment. Frank pulled me aside during the party. You know, property values in the neighborhood have actually gone up since Brenda was arrested. Turns out people would rather live in a place where the HOA president isn't a criminal. I laughed. That's a pretty low bar, true. But Margaret's doing a great job. She's focused on actual issues like maintaining common areas and organizing community events. No more petty violation notices about trucks sticking out 6 inches. Life slowly returned to normal. I continued my work as a civil engineer and volunteer firefighter without interference. The HOA operated smoothly under Margaret's leadership, with reasonable enforcement of actual rules and a focus on community building rather than community policing. My security cameras remained in place, but the only activity they captured was the occasional deer wandering through my yard or neighbors walking their dogs. I received no more violation notices. My truck sat proudly in my driveway, block heater installed and functional, ready to respond to emergencies at a moment's notice. About 6 months after Brenda's sentencing, I responded to a medical emergency on the other side of town. When we arrived, I recognized the address. It was Brenda's house, which had been sold to a new family after her arrest. Her husband had divorced her and moved out of state with their kids. The new owners were a young couple with 2 small children. Their 4-year-old daughter had fallen and hit her head. She was conscious but groggy, and we transported her to the hospital as a precaution. She ended up being fine, just a minor concussion, but as I loaded her into the ambulance, her mother grabbed my arm. "Thank you so much. The neighbors told us about you, that you're usually first on scene because you live nearby. They said the previous HOA president tried to prevent you from keeping your truck here." "That's all resolved now," I said. "Well, we're grateful you fought to stay. You probably saved our daughter's life by getting here so quickly." That moment crystallized everything that had happened. Brenda's vendetta against me hadn't been about parking or property values or community standards. It had been about her own selfishness and criminal enterprise. She'd been willing to put lives at risk, to disable emergency services, all for petty revenge and to cover her theft operation. But she'd failed. The system had worked. Law enforcement had investigated, prosecutors had pursued charges, and the courts had delivered justice. The HOA had corrected course by removing a corrupt leader and electing someone committed to actual community service. As I drove home that night after my shift, I passed the entrance to Meadowbrook Estates. The banner Brenda had hung about parking violations was long gone, replaced by one advertising an upcoming neighborhood block party. Kids were playing basketball in driveways, including driveways where trucks and SUVs stuck out past the garage doors. nobody cared. Nobody was measuring or issuing violation notices. It looked like a real community again. I pulled into my driveway, my truck fitting exactly where it belonged. The block heater cord was plugged in, ready to keep the engine warm overnight so I could respond to the next emergency call. The security cameras monitored silently, but I no longer felt the need to check them obsessively every morning. Frank was outside working in his yard despite the cold. He waved as I got out of my truck. "Good shift," he called over. "Pretty quiet. Helped a little girl who took a tumble." "That's what it's all about," he said, walking over. "Hey, Margaret's planning a volunteer appreciation event next month. She wants to recognize you and the other firefighters who live in the neighborhood." "That's nice of her." "She's trying to rebuild the HOA's reputation after Brenda turned it into a crime syndicate." Frank shook his head. "I still can't believe all that was happening right under our noses. People see what they expect to see." Brenda acted like an overbearing HOA president, so that's what everyone assumed she was. Nobody looked deeper until she pushed too hard. "Well, I'm glad you didn't back down. A lot of people would have just moved or given up." "I thought about it," I admitted, "but this is my home. I wasn't going to let someone chase me out of my own home." We talked for a few more minutes before Frank headed back to his yard work and I went inside. My house was warm and comfortable, my sanctuary restored. I made dinner, watched some television, and went to bed early, knowing my phone might buzz at any time with an emergency call. Around midnight it did. Structure fire on the north side of town. All volunteers requested to respond. I was out of bed, dressed, and in my truck within 3 minutes. The engine started immediately, the block heater having kept everything warm and ready. I made it to the station in record time and joined the crew heading to the fire. We fought that fire for 4 hours, saving the house and preventing it from spreading to neighboring structures. The family made it out safely. As we packed up our equipment at dawn, Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "Nice work tonight, Nathan. I'm glad we didn't lose you from the department. You almost did. If Brenda had succeeded in forcing me to move or give up my truck, I probably would have resigned. But you didn't. You stood your ground and exposed a criminal in the process. That takes courage." Driving home that morning, watching the sun rise over the frozen North Dakota landscape, I felt a sense of peace. The nightmare with Brenda was truly over. She was in prison, paying for her crimes. The HOA was functioning properly under new leadership. My neighbors supported me. And I was still able to serve my community, responding to emergencies and helping people in their worst moments. That's what the whole fight had really been about, not parking spaces or property values or HOA rules. It had been about whether someone with authority could abuse that authority to harm others. It had been about whether a community would stand up to corruption or enable it. It had been about whether doing the right thing mattered more than avoiding conflict. In the end, the right thing had prevailed. Not easily, not quickly, but definitely. Brenda Hutchinson had learned that disabling an emergency vehicle wasn't just mean or petty. It was a serious crime with serious consequences. She'd learned that stealing from your neighbors wasn't a victimless crime, especially when one of those neighbors was trying to save lives. And I'd learned that standing up to bullies and criminals was worth the struggle, even when it seemed easier to just give in. My community was better because I'd fought. Lives would be saved because my emergency vehicle remained operational and ready to respond. As I pulled back into my driveway that morning, exhausted but satisfied, I saw Margaret Simpson walking past with her dog. She waved and came over. "I heard the sirens last night. Was it a bad fire? Could have been worse. We got there in time." "That's what matters," she smiled. You know, I've been thinking about proposing a new policy at the next HOA meeting. A formal accommodation for emergency service vehicles, making it explicitly clear that they're welcome in our neighborhood and that volunteers like you should have every support we can provide. That would be great. It's the least we can do. Brenda should have been supporting you, not tearing you down. We won't make that mistake again. She walked on with her dog, and I went inside to shower and sleep. My phone was still on, still ready to summon me to the next emergency. My truck was parked outside, clearly visible from the street, marked with the emblems of the volunteer fire department. The block heater cord ran from my garage to the engine, keeping everything warm and ready. Everything was exactly as it should be. And tomorrow, I'd wake up and do it all again. Go to work, serve the community, live my life in the home I'd fought to keep. Brenda Hutchinson had tried to drive me out, had tried to disable my ability to help others, had used her authority for personal gain and petty revenge. But she'd failed completely. Justice had been served, the community had been protected, and life had returned to normal. The story could have ended badly. I could have given up and moved away. Brenda could have gotten away with her crimes. The HOA could have continued down a path of petty tyranny and corruption. But none of those things happened because people stood up, spoke out, and refused to accept abuse as normal. That made all the difference.